Okay, ready for this. Today we're going deep on something pretty mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah.
The science of immortality.
Ooh.
Could we actually live forever? It sounds crazy.
I mean, it does sound like science fiction.
Right. But there's some wild research happening
Yeah.
that suggests it might not be as far-fetched as we think.
Interesting.
We're going to unpack some of these new developments and see where we're at in this quest for,
Eternal life.
eternal life. Yeah, exactly.
I think a good place to start is with a pretty basic question.
Okay.
Do humans have, like, a set lifespan? Is there an expiration date written in our genes?
Right. That makes sense.
Ah.
So what's the answer?
Well, it's a tricky one. Some scientists think there is a limit to how long we can live. They point to things like the fact that the oldest recorded lifespans seem to have plateaued.
So they're saying we've kind of hit a ceiling?
Yeah, basically. But then there's another group of researchers who believe our lifespans could, in theory, be unlimited. Yeah, they say the probability of dying never actually hits 100%, even at super old ages.
Okay.
Now, even they admit that living past a certain point, say 125 years,
Yeah.
would be insanely unlikely without some huge advances in, like, biotechnology.
So even the optimists are saying we'd need some serious help to break through
Right.
that barrier.
Yeah.
Where are we now in terms of actually extending lifespan? Have we made any progress?
Actually, more than you might think.
Oh, yeah.
Scientists are looking at a bunch of different approaches, and some of them have had really promising results, especially in animals.
Okay.
Like, there's research showing that there are things in young blood that can actually rejuvenate aging tissues like muscle.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like a real-life fountain of youth.
Yeah.
What are these factors and how do they work?
Well, one of the key players is a protein called GDF11.
Okay.
And when scientists injected this protein into older mice, their muscles got stronger and more youthful.
Wow. That's pretty wild. So is that the secret? Are we all going to be getting young blood transfusions in the future?
It's not that simple.
Right.
There's still a ton of research to do before we start injecting ourselves with young blood.
Right.
But it does give us some really valuable insights into the aging process and how we might be able to tweak it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Another exciting area.
There's gene therapy.
Oh, wow.
Scientists are developing new gene therapies that show real potential in delaying aging and maybe even extending lifespan.
So we could actually reprogram our genes to live longer. That sounds like sci-fi.
I know it does. It may sound futuristic.
Yeah.
The science is moving super fast.
Okay.
And here's another wild one. Researchers have found a gut enzyme that seems to be involved in preventing aging and frailty.
Hold on. A gut enzyme. How does that have anything to do with how long we live?
Well, it turns out our gut microbiome, all those trillions of bacteria living in our intestines,
Right.
they have a way bigger impact on our health and lifespan than we thought. This particular enzyme seems to help protect against the damage that builds up in our cells as we age.
So looking after our gut health could be a key to living longer. I guess all those probiotic ads are onto something.
It's definitely something to think about.
Okay.
But you know what's really interesting? The key to longevity might not be all about our protein-coding genes, the ones that make proteins.
Okay, so if it's not just about the genes that build our bodies, what else is there?
Well, new research is suggesting that something called non-coding RNAs, or ncRNAs, could play a big role.
ncRNAs, what are those?
Okay, so think about it this way. Our DNA has all the instructions for building and running our bodies.
Right.
Protein coding genes are like the blueprints for the parts, the proteins.
Yep.
ncRNAs are more like the construction managers. They don't make the parts themselves, but they control when and how those blueprints get used.
So they're like the behind-the-scenes bosses making sure everything runs smoothly.
Exactly. And get this,
Yeah.
as species evolve to have longer lifespans, they tend to gather more and more of these ncRNAs in their genomes.
So the more ncRNAs you have, the longer you live. Is that what the research is saying?
It's not quite as straightforward as that,
Okay.
but there's definitely a link. It seems these ncRNAs have a powerful influence on how our genes are expressed,
Right.
which then affects things like cell growth, repair, aging.
I'm starting to see how these ncRNAs could be big players in this whole longevity thing.
Right.
But how do we go from understanding these tiny molecules to actually extending human lifespan?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. There seems to be a connection between lifespan and mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells.
Mitochondria. Yeah, I remember learning about those in biology.
Yeah.
They're the energy factories of the cell.
Exactly.
Right.
And research suggests that as species evolve longer lifespans, their mitochondrial genomes, the DNA inside their mitochondria actually gets smaller.
Wait, smaller mitochondria lead to longer life? That doesn't seem right. Wouldn't smaller mitochondria be worse at producing energy?
It's a good question. It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but remember, efficiency isn't always about making the most energy. Sometimes it's about using energy wisely.
So you're saying that smaller mitochondria might help us live longer by saving energy.
That's one of the main theories.
Interesting.
Yeah, the idea is that smaller mitochondrial genomes could mean less energy is wasted,
Okay.
and that could contribute to a longer lifespan.
Okay, that's fascinating. So it's not just about the genes in our cells, but also the genes in our mitochondria. It seems like this aging thing is even more complex than I thought.
You're absolutely right. It's a really complicated puzzle, and we're only just starting to figure it out. But what's really cool? We're starting to find specific differences in these ncRNAs that seem to be linked to how long different individuals live.
Wait, so there are differences in these ncRNAs that could explain why some people live longer than others? Like what kind of differences?
Well, researchers have found certain patterns or motifs in ncRNAs that are more common in species that live longer.
Okay.
For example, one motif, GGT-GCG, seems to be particularly important.
So this GGTTGCG motif is like a sign of longevity.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting is that these longevity-associated motifs are especially active in certain tissues, like the endometrium, ovary, testis, and cerebral cortex.
So those specific areas of the body are key to how long we live.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
And the fact that these longevity-associated motifs are so common in the female reproductive system might partly explain why women usually live longer than men.
That is so interesting. It's like we're finally starting to uncover the secrets of longevity hidden right there in our cells.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But if we're starting to figure out these genetic factors that affect lifespan, does that mean we're close to cracking the code to immortality? Or do we actually see a future where people live for centuries?
That's a big question, and one we'll dive into more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But I'll give you a hint. True immortality, living forever, might still be in the realm of science fiction.
Okay.
But the possibility of extending our healthy lifespan is becoming more and more real.
That's exciting. I can't wait to hear more about it. But before we move on,
Yes.
don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations into, well, everything.
Definitely.
And be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you.
Okay, so we were talking about these incredible breakthroughs in aging research, especially with those ncRNAs and their potential impact on lifespan.
Right.
But let's go back to that big question you teased.
Yeah.
Could we actually live for centuries? Is immortality really possible?
Well, the idea of true immortality, like living forever, is still pretty much science fiction.
Yeah.
But what is becoming more and more realistic is the idea of extending our healthy lifespan.
Yeah.
You know what scientists call compressing morbidity?
Compressing morbidity. What does that mean?
It basically means squeezing those years of sickness and decline that usually come with old age into a much shorter time at the end of our lives.
Right.
Imagine living a long, vibrant life, feeling healthy and active well into your 90s or even when hundreds, and then having a relatively short period of decline before you die.
That's the idea behind compressing morbidity.
That sounds amazing.
Right.
Living a long life is one thing, but living a long, healthy life is a whole different ballgame.
Exactly.
It would be a total game changer for people and for society.
Absolutely. It would totally change healthcare as we know it. Instead of focusing on treating individual diseases as they pop up, we could target the aging process itself.
Wow.
Imagine a world where age-related diseases like Alzheimer's, heart disease, and cancer are a thing of the past, or at least delayed significantly.
That would be incredible. But let's take a step back for a second.
Sure.
What would a world with much longer lifespans actually look like?
That's a really big question with huge implications for pretty much every aspect of society. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Our current structures, our economies, our families, even our understanding of what it means to be human are all built around a limited lifespan.
I can only imagine the changes we'd have to make. Everything from retirement planning to how we use resources to the very structure of our families and communities would have to be rethought.
Exactly. It wouldn't just be about adapting to living longer, it would be about reimagining the whole human experience.
Right.
For example, if people knew they could potentially live for centuries, would they still want to retire at 65? Would traditional family structure stay the same? How would we manage resources sustainably with a growing population?
It's mind-boggling to even think about. If we could potentially add decades or even centuries to our lives, what would we do with all that time?
Right.
Would we still go for the same old goals, or would our priorities change completely?
That's a question each person would have to answer for themselves.
Yeah.
But it opens up some fascinating possibilities. Imagine having the time to master multiple careers, travel the world extensively, or really dive deep into intellectual pursuits that just aren't possible with a limited lifespan.
It's like we'd be a different species almost.
Yeah.
But on a more practical level, wouldn't extending lifespans put a huge strain on resources
Mhm.
and potentially make existing social inequalities worse?
Those are definitely valid concerns. Sustainability and equity would be super important in a world with much longer lifespans. We'd need to find new ways to manage resources, ensure everyone has access to life-extending technologies, and deal with the potential for a bigger gap between those who can afford to live longer and those who can't.
So it's not just about the science of making people live longer, but also about the ethical and social responsibility that goes with it.
Exactly. It's a complicated issue with no easy answers. But it's a conversation we need to start having now as the science keeps moving forward so rapidly.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a new frontier with the potential to completely redefine what it means to be human.
Yeah.
It's exciting and a little scary, isn't it?
I think that's a perfect way to put it. And this leads us to another important part of this whole discussion: individual differences in lifespan.
Right. We've been talking about extending lifespan in general,
Yeah,
but we all know that some people just naturally live longer than others.
right.
Is that just luck, or is there something more going on?
Well, as we talked about earlier, research on ncRNAs has shown that there are specific genetic patterns linked to longevity.
Hmm.
And these patterns can be different from one person to the next.
So are you saying our genes can actually tell us how long we're likely to live?
It's not quite as simple as that.
Okay.
While genes definitely play a role, it's not the whole story. Lifestyle choices, the environment, and even random events all contribute to how long we live.
So it's a mix of nature and nurture, as with most things. But
Exactly.
if we can start to understand these genetic factors that affect longevity, could we potentially do something to improve our chances of living longer, healthier lives?
That's the ultimate goal of a lot of this research.
Hmm.
To not only understand how aging works, but to develop interventions that can slow it down and prevent or delay age-related diseases.
That's a very hopeful thought.
It is.
It seems like we're on the verge of a new era in healthcare, where instead of just treating diseases, we actually prevent them by targeting the aging process itself.
I think that's exactly where the future of medicine is headed. And the more we learn about aging, the more we realize how much potential there is to improve human health and well-being.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Has.
We've covered so much from the latest scientific discoveries to the ethical and societal implications of extending lifespan.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious about something. We've been talking about extending lifespan as a positive thing.
Yeah.
And I think most people would agree that living longer, healthier lives is a good thing.
Sure.
But are there any potential downsides to extending lifespan that we should be thinking about?
That's a great question, and it's one that ethicists and philosophers have been thinking about for ages. There are definitely potential downsides to consider. For example, some people argue that extending lifespan could lead to overpopulation, make resource scarcity worse, and create new types of social inequality.
Those are some serious concerns.
Mm.
And what about the psychological effects of living for centuries?
Yeah.
Would people get bored or lose their sense of purpose if they had such long lives?
That's another good point. The human mind is used to a limited lifespan. It's possible that living for centuries could lead to existential dread, a feeling of detachment from the world, or even a fear of death that gets stronger the longer we live.
It seems like there are a lot of unknowns and challenges that we would need to deal with before we could really embrace the idea of living much longer lives.
Absolutely. It's not a simple issue, and
Yeah.
there are no easy answers. But I believe the potential benefits of extending healthy lifespan for both individuals and society are so significant that it's worth exploring. Of course, we need to be careful considering the ethical implications and making sure that any life-extending technologies are developed and used responsibly and fairly.
It sounds like we're entering a whole new world, both scientifically and ethically.
We are.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's a fascinating and complex topic, and I'm glad we had this discussion.
Extending human lifespan brings up some really deep ethical and societal questions.
It does.
It's like we're on the brink of a whole new phase of human evolution.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, beyond those big societal questions, there are some really interesting personal things to think about, too.
Like what?
Well, take the idea of identity. Who are you if you could live for hundreds of years? How would your values, your goals, your sense of self change over such a long time?
That's a great point. Would we even recognize ourselves after decades or centuries of living and experiencing new things? Would we still believe in the same things we do now?
It's hard to know for sure, but it's likely that our identities would become a lot more fluid and always changing as we learn new things, build new relationships, and gain new perspectives.
That's a fascinating idea. It's almost like we'd become different versions of ourselves over the course of one long life.
Exactly. And imagine the impact on relationships, marriages, friendships, family dynamics. They'd all be completely different if people lived for centuries.
Would we still form those really strong bonds, knowing that we could outlive the people we love by decades or even centuries?
That's something everyone would have to figure out for themselves. But it's definitely worth thinking about. And on a bigger scale, how would our legal systems, our economies, our healthcare systems handle such big changes in how long people live?
It's almost too much to think about all the possible effects. It seems like extending lifespan wouldn't just be a scientific breakthrough. It would be a total change in how we understand and organize human life.
You're absolutely right. It would be a huge transformation, changing everything about our lives and the world we live in.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, where do you think we go from here? What are the next steps in trying to unlock the secrets of longevity?
I think the most important thing is to keep doing research from all angles.
Okay.
From genetics and molecular biology to lifestyle changes and even the psychological and social effects of a longer lifespan.
So it's a whole picture approach dealing with the science, the ethics, and the human experience all at the same time.
Exactly. And we need to keep the conversation going, talking to the public, policymakers, and experts from all different fields to make sure we're approaching this incredible opportunity wisely and thoughtfully.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes. It's shown me how much potential there is in aging research, but also how many complicated questions we need to answer as we move forward.
It's a journey full of promise and challenges, and I'm excited to see where it takes us.
Well, this has been an absolutely amazing deep dive into the science of immortality. We've talked about the latest scientific breakthroughs, the ethical questions, and the potential for a future where humans could live much longer than we ever thought possible.
It's been great exploring this with you.
And as always, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the possibility of extending human lifespan? What are you hoping for and worried about in a future where people could live much longer? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations into the unknown.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.